to Syria, yesterday at around this time, I think during this briefing, the Secretary of State was holding a briefing, I believe via video conference, over at the State Department, during which he said absolutely he believes that Syria used chemical bombs, that the Syrian regime has used chemical bombs in that civil war. And I just want to go back to the red line question, and I know, it makes people wince inside this White House when we bring this up, but
I'm not wincing.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this: Does the Secretary of State's conviction that Syria absolutely has used chemical bombs constitute crossing that red line that the president drew?
Jim, we indicated back in the summer of 2013, the intelligence community had concluded with high confidence that the Assad regime had used chemical weapons. And this administration proceeded to engage in an effort to try to resolve the significant concerns about an action like that. And what this administration did, working closely with our partners around the world, including Russia, succeeded in getting the Assad regime to acknowledge that they had a stockpile of chemical weapons. We then worked with the international community to round up those chemical weapons, and we used the unique capabilities of the United States to destroy those chemical weapons, both to ensure that they could not be used against the Syrian population, but also to prevent against the real risk of proliferation, that those weapons could fall into the hands of extremists or terrorists that actually seek to do harm to the United States or our interests.
But despite those efforts, it appears the Assad regime is using chemical bombs.
Well, the reports, right, so that's a very important distinction.
Well, maybe not to the people on the ground.
Well, but it is when it relates to the kind of threat that they pose, both when it comes to the proliferation risk and to the potential damage that it could do. There is no doubt. You've heard me use rather colorful language over the last 2 or 3 years in describing the terrible atrocities that have been committed by the Assad regime. That includes the use of barrel bombs, and that includes the use of chlorine as a weapon. But the fact is that chlorine is also an industrial chemical that does have legitimate purposes. I don't think there's anybody who stood at this podium or any other suggesting that that all chlorine should be removed from Syria. What we've insisted upon is that the outrageous, catastrophic, violent behavior of the Assad regime that's been perpetrated against the Syrian people should come to an end. And that includes the use of chlorine to try to attack people.
And if the Assad regime were to use something that the White House considers to be chemical weapons, the use of chemical weapons, that red line threat still exists, does it not? Because even after all those efforts to remove all those chemical munitions, I would hazard a guess that this White House would want to still enforce that red line in the future, that red line still exists.
Well, Jim, of course it does. The point is, though, that the declared chemical weapons stockpile that Assad previously denied existed has now been acknowledged, rounded up, removed from the country, and destroyed precisely because of the work of this administration and our successful efforts to work with the Russians to accomplish that goal. So yes, that red line is absolutely still in place, but the fact is that's less of a threat than it was 2 years ago because of the concrete actions taken by this administration and because of our ability to work successfully with the Russians in this endeavor.
And one last thing, I don't